Hello my wonderful, beautiful friends, guys. Welcome back to r/MaliciousCompliance, where people follow orders to spite someone. And in today's episode, it's all about scummy landlords getting what they deserve. And the landlord tells OP to see them in court, and OP makes him regret it so bad. I hope you enjoy the stories today, guys. Subscribe if you're not subscribed. And as always, you can send or link your post to this email right here. Let's dive in. Okay, so let me tell you about this one. I had a landlord in the past who slipped a 90-day notice requirement into the rental contract after I signed it. I was house hunting, so at the end of my lease, I asked to go to a month-to-month lease to make it easier to leave when the time came. Landlord and I agreed on a higher monthly price to compensate them for the lack of security, and I signed the contract at the office of a business they also owned downstairs. The landlord wasn't actually present, but one of their employees handled it. So the contract is signed, and they go to make me a copy for my records, but they're having an issue with the copier. After a few minutes, they ask if they can text me when they get it to work. I naively agree and head upstairs. 30 minutes later, they text me saying they got the copier to work, and I come pick up my copy. I didn't think to double check everything at the time. So for the next few months, I just pay my monthly rent while looking for a home. Finally, I find the right place, and the closing date was 4 weeks out. So I immediately notified my landlord that I would be leaving on said date. And this is where it gets weird. The landlord responds that it's nice I found a home, but I would be responsible for the next 2 months' rent after that as well, due to the 90-day notification requirement in the contract. Of course, I'm totally confused. So I go check my copy of the contract, and sure enough, there's a stipulation in there about that. I also noticed that my initials from the top and bottom of each page, verifying that I've read the page, have somehow mysteriously shifted to being doubled up at the top of the page after the stipulation, with none on the bottom of the actual page. This was because they had inserted 2 lines of text detailing the 90-day reporting requirement after I signed the paperwork. They didn't notice the formatting error it created, which was a dead giveaway of what was going on. So I informed the landlord of this and notify him that it's not a legally binding contract due to the issue, and state that I will not be paying any further rent beyond this month, and expect my deposit back without penalty. Unfortunately, he persists, stating that it is a legally binding contract and he will pursue it in court, in addition to withholding my deposit if I fail to pay. Blah blah blah. He also tells me he doesn't want me to go this route because it won't end well for me. Now I know I'm legally in the right, but I don't want to have to deal with courts to settle it, as that takes forever. So I come up with an alternative plan. The one thing he hadn't thought about was the fact that the contract included all utilities, as the unit didn't have separate meters and did not have any language forbidding excessive use of them. Well, it just so happened to be a very, very cold winter, so I informed my landlord if he wanted to persist with his demands, that I would be inclined to leave all of the windows open and then crank the heat as high as it would go. On top of that, I would also open the fridge door, run the water 24/7, etc. And if he entered the apartment without my permission to turn these items off, I would report him to the police, as in the contract it states all utilities included. I got confirmation that he would not pursue the extra month's rent or security deposit within 20 minutes. Honestly guys, it never ceases to amaze me the things people will do to take advantage of others. Like doctoring the lease agreement after someone signed it has gotta be one of the scummiest things ever. And it really has me wondering how many people he did this to and then threatened them with court to get what he wanted. I'm just glad OP got out of it, and holy, that utilities thing was brilliant. Well frickin' played. With that said though, is there anything OP could have done, guys? Like, I think I would have contacted a lawyer or something to show them that blatantly forged document. Because in my mind, if the landlord wants to play the court game, he's got it. I'd be going scorched earth on that guy. We all do stupid stuff in our 20s, right? Well, for me, it was moving into a shoddy apartment with my fellow mental health risk friend. We were both well aware that we might have to break the lease at some point, so we found this apartment that was barely within price range and had the option to break the lease early. The place was okay at first. There was linoleum peeling up in the bathroom, and the place was really humid for some reason. If we didn't wipe down the windowsills, and particularly the corner ceilings of my bedroom, then we would get mold. But this is Oregon, and as a food stamp family as I was called in high school, I'm familiar with mold. No biggie. Things just kept going downhill though. Our washer, which we were paying an extra $100 a month to have in the unit, starts leaking. So we put in a maintenance request to our landlord, and tack on the peeling linoleum as well, since they'd already be in the unit to fix the washer. They patched up the washer, and they did a half-assed job repairing the patch of linoleum. A month later, the linoleum, since they hadn't fixed the underlying problem, had come up again and started peeling. The corner sliced my foot open. And on top of that, the bathroom sink, the washer, and dishwashers all had problems of one kind or another. Nothing was working properly. The landlord came in again and said if we want them to fix that patch again, it would cost $450 to replace the patch of floor. The patch was like a 2-foot square, so that never got replaced. 2 months later, with still a broken dishwasher that was unusable, a leaky washer, and a close call where my roommate fell down the stairs, we put in a request to be released from the lease on early grounds of mental and physical disability. Remember, we had the option to break the lease early. The landlord denied the request, simply offering to move us to the downstairs unit. They were trying very hard to keep us on this lease, and they don't want to let us out of it. So I thought, fine, malicious compliance incoming. I went through the lease agreement to see what I could do to get back at the guy, and to figure out how much it would be to break the lease. And what I found was amazing. The lease quoted, "The fee to break this lease is $1.50 rent," which was supposed to be 1.5 times rent. Someone either messed up the paperwork or figured that no one would read it. So with that and a big smile on my face, I put in a 30-day notice of intent to move out, with $1.50 worth of quarters in the envelope. So in the end, they got 6 quarters instead of $2,439.79. So here's the aftermath. They tried to tell us that we couldn't move out because in the letter, it was supposed to say 1.5 times rent, not $1.50 rent. That's when they threatened us with lawyers and to take us to court. We called their bluff and suggested that they reread the lease agreement they signed, and we haven't heard from them in 3 months. Guys, I love this so much. And the fact that the scummy landlord knew that there was nothing that could be done about it made it even better. Gotta love a good typo, right? And really, I don't know how some landlords can sleep at night knowing their tenants are in the worst living conditions ever. Like, how the heck do you sleep, sir, when your tenants are begging you to come fix the most basic things? That just makes the $1.50 he got out of OP so much better, guys. So I recently heard a landlord story from you, and it reminded me that I have one of my own to share. It's about 7 years ago. I'm living in a trailer park because it was my own place, and it got me the hell away from my parents and didn't cost me an arm and leg for rent. Was it cramped? You bet. But living on my own was a freedom I can't understate. The place came with its own price though. The landlord was kind of lazy. Hell, I didn't even get a tank of propane when I signed the lease. I had to pay for it myself. But rolled into rent was all utilities besides electricity, which oddly enough, the landlord was responsible for adding that to our rent every month. This led to some interesting issues that eventually got resolved, but that's not within the scope of this sub. Other than that, the landlord paid everything. My trailer was full of issues, mostly parts breaking from just old age. But one of the bigger things was the outdoor lighting. You see, there was a very small step that went up to the concrete platform my trailer sat on, and it was small enough that I have no idea why it was put there, but big enough that you'll easily trip on it. The landlord put down these cheap solar lights to keep it lit, but those had since died. I brought it to the landlord's attention, and they promised to get it fixed. This went on for weeks. Finally, after a particularly bad day at work, I decided I had enough once I tripped over it. So I went to Home Depot and I picked up some better solar lights and I stuck them where the old ones were. These ones were so much brighter. And finally, I and visitors wouldn't trip on the way to my front door. Or so I thought. A couple of days later, I come home from work and my solar lights are crudely ripped out of the ground and tossed aside. And there's a notice taped to my door that said, residents are not allowed to make their own repairs or modifications to anything on their property. If you need anything, please contact Lazy Landlord. Consider this a warning. And for those curious, for the entire year and a half I lived there, no, they never replaced the lights. I did, however, stick a directional light on the one outdoor light I was allowed to replace and aimed it right at the offending step. This becomes relevant later. I just sighed angrily and went about the rest of my day. Now, remember when I said things were breaking on my trailer from old age? Well, a few months later, I come home from work to hear water running near my trailer. It was around the corner, and I noticed that the big water hose feeding my trailer water had basically disintegrated from being old and worn, and was spewing water everywhere. I was about to shut the water off, but then I remembered that 1, the landlord pays the water bill, 2, that they were lazy and never did anything, and 3, when I did try to correct for their laziness, they lost it on me for daring to make my life somewhat better. So with that, I turned around, went back to my car, called my mom, and asked if I could stay the night at her house, to which she agreed. Sure, I knew exactly where the shutoff valve was for the water line going to my trailer, and could I have engaged it? Yes, I could have. But seeing as the last time I did something good I was screamed at for making my own repairs, no, the landlord was going to pay for all that water, and her laziness too. The landlord popped by, and she found out about it a few days later, and she tried to hassle me over it, asking me why I never brought it up to her. But I pointed out that she specifically told me that if I tried to do anything on my own again, I would get in trouble, so I figured I'd leave the water issues to the professionals. She eventually got fired from her job a couple of months after the whole thing went down. Her replacement was so much better about things. Guys, the landlord totally deserved that. Again, some people should not be landlords. Like, I do understand it when landlords tell tenants to not make repairs or modifications to the rental, as you know, people can potentially create even bigger messes and headaches for them. But scolding someone for putting up solar lights for safety and then not doing anything about it for a year and a half after that, yeah, that is something else. And this person shares a similar story about being at a trailer park where they absolutely destroy their landlord. So a few years back, my family went through some pretty horrible stuff, and we ended up moving into a trailer park. It didn't look too awful as far as trailer parks go, and it was barely cheap enough to afford at the time, so we swallowed our doubts and moved in. The first night, we discover there's bed bugs and roaches. We report the problem to the landlord the next morning, and they say we must have brought them in ourselves. That was the first clue that living there was going to be a problem. Fast forward a while, and things just keep getting worse and worse. There's a water leak every couple of weeks, and the landlord just sends a guy out to cut down the existing water hoses and refasten them every single time, instead of replacing the rotting water lines. There are so many issues on top of that. The water heater's falling through the floor. Rats are coming up through the heat vents in the floor. The ceiling leaks, and there's a spot on the floor where you can stomp and knock the power out to half the trailer. It was horrible. Every time we complained or asked for something to be fixed, anything, this fat landlord would say it's our fault. The guy never treated for roaches, never fixed the gaping holes in the heating conduits under the trailer, and never fixed the leaks in the ceiling. Even being threatened by the health department didn't get the guy off his ass. So that's when another issue comes up. We got a slow water leak, this time behind the bathtub. It was a wet winter, so our yard was a swamp anyways. The landlord paid the water bill, and the meters were set up, so it was impossible to tell which trailer had the leak. So we decided to let it leak all winter long. The first month, he was coming in bitching to the office one day about how high his water bill was. By the second month, the leak started spraying water at the back of our tub, so it was bigger. The guy's water bill went up again. By December, it was obvious there was a big problem, so he called the water company out to investigate. We turned our water off while they were there, so they couldn't pinpoint the leak if they pressure tested the lines, which they couldn't do anyway. And as soon as they left, we turned it back on. By January, his water bills were so high that his partner came up, thinking he must be embezzling funds from the utility account. They called the water company again and were told that the only way to fix the problem would be to seal the main water line that ran the entire length of the park. Basically, a crew comes out and blows a high-pressure stream of some chemical that hardens on contact with the walls of the pipe and seals them, and it's a long pipe. The repair estimate was $25,000 for a problem that did not even exist. For 5 days, the crew was at the park, blowing this funk into the pipe and checking to see if they fixed the leak. We waited until the entire length of the pipe had been coated and then fixed the leak ourselves. It cost us $14, and we moved out 2 months later. So here's a brief backstory. A couple of years ago, I was in an apartment with my friend and younger sister. My sister was violent toward my friend and I ended up having to get a restraining order against her. She brought in a dog without permission, which caused some damage to the unit. I informed my landlord and sent him pictures. He basically told me to deal with it myself, which I did by getting a protective order. After this, my roommate questioned the legality of holding us responsible for her portion of the rent. I told her it was, but she asked our landlord for a copy of the lease to show her uncle anyway, which admittedly was pretty stupid. Up until this point, our landlord had not asked us to leave due to my sister's actions, but he did after the lease was brought into it. We were out by the date he specified on the notice to quit. My roommate was there until midnight, making sure the place was spotless. We moved into an apartment across the street. So 2 weeks had passed since he was informed that we had vacated the unit and we had not gotten anything regarding security deposit. In our state, the landlord's required by law to either return the remainder of the security deposit within 2 weeks or provide a letter itemizing what the deposit was used for. If they don't, the tenants owe the entire deposit. If the withholding is willful, the tenants owe double the original deposit. The landlord had actually told me that he would be going on vacation immediately after we vacated. So I returned the keys to him and waited to see if he would send anything. The guy never did. After consulting with a tenants' right group to be sure I was in the right, I sent a pre-formatted letter 16 days after we vacated, which stated the specific laws regarding security deposits, and gave him our current address to either send the deposit or a receipt to. The day after I sent the letter, I see him across the street, frantically running into the apartment for the first time since we moved out. I then receive a text from him saying he'd return what's left of the deposit if he could get the apartment rented by the 1st of next month. I respond by telling him that as the letter I sent explained, he forfeits the right to keep any of the deposit after the 2 weeks is up. The guy just responds saying he would see us in court, and that we were nightmare tenants and that this will be fun. He said he would also be taking us to court for the cost to relist and rent the apartment, which he claimed exceeded the amount of our deposit. So after about a month or two of hearing nothing back, we decide to say F it, and we file a small claim suit against him, as clearly he wasn't going to follow through on his threats. As the person who had almost all communication with him, I was the plaintiff in this case. The guy brought the letter that was dated for the day he texted me, where he wrote in what he used the deposit on and claimed he sent us the letter. Now that obviously didn't add up, which I thoroughly explained to the judge, as he texted me that day saying that we would get some of the deposit returned, and that he had no proof that he actually sent the letter. The guy clearly just wrote it and printed it out for the court hearing. During the court hearing, he also said a lot of false and victim-blaming stuff, such as implying that I participated in the violence that occurred, saying that we caused the damages that were definitely there when we moved in, and just attacking my character in general. The judge ruled that withholding the security deposit was willful and awarded us double the deposit. But of course, that wasn't the end of it, and a few days before his deadline to pay us the money, he sends me a text saying, "Just letting you know, the decision has been appealed." I didn't answer, I just showed up to court again. And lo and behold, it's more mudslinging and arguing about things we'd already established in the first hearing. The judge upheld the original decision, and he eventually mailed me the check for double the deposit. And in the memo line on the check where you can write the reason for payment, the guy wrote to me for gaining 20 pounds. But hey, I just cashed the check and spent half on a new gaming laptop, so I'd say I got the last laugh. I desperately wanted to text him and ask him if it was as fun as he thought it would be, but I resisted the urge. Good on OP for calling the guy's bluff and taking him to court. Like, it's always so funny to hear shady landlords using taking someone to court as a scare tactic to get people to back off, and then having it totally blow up on them. And if I were OP guys, I totally would have been petty and been like, not as fun as you thought it was, hey? Especially after he wrote that for gaining 20 pounds in the memo line. Adding insult to injury would have been fair game at that point. So this isn't my story, but it's my cousin's that she recently shared with me. The background is, my cousin, her wife, and their 2 kids lived in a rented apartment, along with 5 other resident units in a European country. The place isn't completely upscale, but it's definitely not slum, and it's a really beautiful place. That's when their landlord decided to evict as many residents as he could, so he could renovate and bump up the rent by 3 times. Pretty crappy. This all occurred starting back in September. Now, Scumlord, as my cousin passionately called him, had tried to keep it a secret, but another tenant who did work on the apartments for a reduced rent found paperwork when he was fixing a broken window at Scumlord's residence, which happened to be a very, very nice house. He shared it with the other residents because that paperwork was drafts of eviction notices for random things. For example, pictures of the residents in apartment 3 leaving garbage in the hallway. According to my cousin who lived in apartment 3, they kept finding bags of garbage outside their door. Not theirs, but ones full of fast food, takeouts, and very unsettling magazines. My cousin is vegetarian and their family doesn't eat takeout, so it's definitely not their garbage. But back to the story. So basically, my cousin and all the other residents came together in their courtyard and realized that their landlord was faking these sorts of things to get them all evicted, with fake photographic evidence. None of them were very happy, especially since one apartment was apparently being rented by the couples who just had their first child, another an elderly couple who had nowhere else to go, and the maintenance guy who couldn't find anywhere closer to work and he didn't have a car. Rent prices were skyrocketing and these guys literally had nowhere else to go. Of course, they found this out while Scumlord was out of town, so they couldn't confront him. As they were stewing over this, my cousin's wife had an idea. They had been planning to repaint their living room because the paint was peeling, and Scumlord had said in an email to just paint it. Now, he didn't specify how it was painted or what color needed to be used. So my cousin's wife Allie suggested that they get permission to paint their places, but in horrendous ways, and then move out quickly. Everyone except the older couple jumped on board, which, as my cousin explained to me, they didn't want to start a fight in a losing battle. The older couple later managed to move into a retirement community that their families found for them to go to. Anyways, the rest of the residents agreed to it, and Scumlord was sent email requests for repaints. And he basically said, go for it, in each one. I guess he thought he could get free paint jobs done from them. So while juggling their normal lives, my cousin's family and the other 4 units all set out to find new places. They start packing, setting up everything for the painting, and then proceed to paint their walls. My cousin, however, decided to be extra vindictive and buys a crap ton of black paint, along with varying neon colors. She and Allie then painted on as many layers of black paint that they could, after using primer, of course, in every single room. Even the bathrooms and ceilings weren't spared. They finished in about mid-November, and they let their kids, who are 5 and 8, loose with the neon colors. I'm talking handprints, random swatches of paint, footprints on the ceiling, just every random thing that those 2 kids wanted to do. According to my cousin, it was a glorious, horrific disaster. She even told me that there was a butt print. She didn't know what the other places were like, only hearing that the maintenance guy painted rainbows everywhere, that the family in apartment 5 had just thrown different color paints on the walls at random. Everyone pretty much had bad paint jobs that needed to be repainted to rent out. Thankfully, my cousin's family managed to find a place before Christmas, which was smaller, but it was in a good area of town. They sent their moving notice and they booked it. 2 weeks later, after they settled in their new place, Scumlord's blowing up their cell phones. He was pissed by all the new looks. The guy wanted to sue them and threaten court. My cousin and Allie obliged. So court day comes and Slumlord actually had a lawyer. The guy was suing all 5 former residents at once. And he claimed a whole bunch of crap, including all the reasons for the evictions. And the maintenance guy destroyed him. He provided proof about the fake eviction evidence. And then they all provided the email printouts of the paint requests, pointing out how Scumlord never specified how it was to be painted or the colors. So the judge threw Scumlord's case out the window and ordered him to pay restitution for damages. My cousin's family got the restitution, and she watched in glee as Scumlord struggled to undo the paint damages, before apparently giving up and tried to sell the building. So far, there have been no takers. And to clarify, former tenants want nothing to do with the old apartment anymore. As for repainting, I wasn't kidding when I said a crap ton of paint was bought and used. According to my cousin, they painted so many layers that every wall had thick coats of paint on it. So imagine trying to clean up all that. And Lord knows how much paint was applied in the other units. Holy guys, like I don't know about you, but I hate painting. And I couldn't imagine painting a whole apartment unit with enough coats to make it as thick as OP was saying it was. Unless they just went mad and coated the roller and did one super duper thick coat. Which I could see that being more reasonable than doing like 20 coats. But what a way to spite someone. A whole apartment, walls and ceilings painted black. Like what a nightmare that must have been to see. I'm a 25-year-old female, and I've been renting a house since I was 18. 7 years. When I moved in, the backyard was a large piece of dirt. There was no lawn or anything. Just a decently big backyard with fence all around. It was cheap, but not a great house, but I signed because I wanted the backyard space. Over the past few years, I erected a small garden shed, greenhouse, planted lots of veggie gardens in big transportable garden beds, and put down some nice stones. Generally just made the backyard really green and a beautiful place to be. It became the green oasis that all of my friends gathered at. A few months ago, my landlords let me know that they were planning to sell, and the final move-out day was a week ago. When I left, I brought my garden with me to my new place. Nothing in my last backyard was directly planed into the ground, nothing permanent. I dismantled the sheds and greenhouse, and loaded up all the pots and garden beds into a truck. I cleared the backyard in 3 days with lots of help. My former landlords are furious over this, and they demand that I return the backyard to the former state. Apparently they had listed the house for sale with pictures of the backyard, and the potential buyers were walking away from the house when they saw the barren backyard. The landlords accusing me of stealing their plants and wrecking the backyard. Legally, I'm fine. My contract said that I could garden, and I have photos from the first real estate walkthrough before I moved in that show that the backyard was in the same state that I first found it, although with more fertile soil now probably. The same real estate agent signed off on my final inspection and I got my deposit back. I've received mixed responses though, because I saw the landlords taking pictures of my backyard before I left. But I didn't make the connection because in my humble opinion, when pictures of a house has furniture in it, you don't expect to also get free furniture. Some of my coworkers suggested that I'm the a-hole because the house valuation certainly has fallen dramatically because I didn't tell them I was taking my garden with me. So am I the a-hole in this situation? Yeah, I do not think OP's the a-hole at all in this situation, guys, and I'm sharing this post because a lot of people are saying that the landlord left the backyard like this in hopes that their tenants will do the work and they can profit from it. This person says, you are not the a-hole. This is a very classic story of a landlord trying to benefit off of home improvements paid for by the tenant. If your landlord was honest, he would have asked you how much you wanted to leave the garden as it was. You owe him nothing. And this person says, not the a-hole, it's all temporary structures that you paid for and can take with you. The landlord is just salty because he tried to pull a fast one and it did not work. So yeah, ending off the episode with an entitled landlord trying to take advantage of a tenant and having it backfire. Guys, let me know your thoughts. And that, my friends, brings us to another end of r/MaliciousCompliance. Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's stories. If you did, hit that thumbs up. And if you're not subscribed, consider subscribing so you don't miss these crazy stories. And if you missed the last episode on the channel, it's an r/entitled people episode. Another one where a crazy Karen breaks into somebody's house to take a bath and it just gets worse and worse. Guys, go check it out if you haven't, and myself and Stevie Boy will see you guys in the next one. We love you.